let us begin our third workshop in the leadership development track. It is my pleasure to introduce our third speaker. Enoch Liao currently serves at Boston Chinese Evangelical Church. He is married to Karen, and they have 3 sons at home and 1 daughter who has passed on. Enoch received his education from UCLA and Talbot School of Theology. Enoch is also currently enrolled in the PhD program at Western Seminary. He is the chair and a founding board member for the Boston Center for Biblical Counseling. He is the author of In Reverence and Awe, a practical worship leading resource. Enoch enjoys spending time with his family, running, martial arts, and playing the occasional video game. Welcome, Enoch. The floor is yours.
Thank you, David. I will begin. Thanks for going here. I'm assuming you're in this workshop because the other workshops are full, or maybe because this topic might be useful for you or of interest to you. I want to say flat out from the beginning, it's great to be here. Appreciate the invitation from Princeton, as well as the Center for Asian American Study for Christianity, and David. I guess I should call him Dr. Chow, Professor Chow. And yeah, I need at least some face to give me some reaction to know that I'm offending or something. But that's cool. You don't have to stand there, David. I'm a part of a larger track here for it's leadership in Asian American regarding wholeness. And I would have loved to listen in on all the plenaries and the workshops so far, but I actually find myself at a conference that David himself might have been here, had things worked out differently. I'm at an Epic East Coast conference over in Maryland, and the Epic folks are gracious to give me the free time of the afternoon block, and this center here is grateful to give me their boardroom. So it's good to be joining you from Maryland. I'm going to open in quick word in prayer, and then I feel like this is an intimate, cozy number of people. So I'm seeing about 12 people online, not including David and Shuri in the lounge. And I think people in the physical lounge, it was like maybe 10 or something. So I'm going to actually be a little bit more interactive if I can lean into that. So I'm grateful for that. And again, I won't be offended if you're like, oh, wait, this is the wrong workshop. I'm going to jump out now because I can't see you. So, but let me pray. We'll say a word of prayer and we'll continue here. Let's pray together. Gracious Father, we thank you for the opportunity to talk and gather about several important themes and topics that definitely are a part of my life. And we know that you care about, Father, your church, your people, wholeness among the generations, mental health. And of course, you love all people. And this relatively recent thing in human history of Asian Americans, and which alone is a hugely interesting and complicated and interesting topic at times. But for now, as we're in this space and we're seeking to learn and think about what we can do in our ministries or churches, I wish I could listen to people in the room. I have no doubt there are many people here who are more than qualified to offer their own wisdom and insights, and I would love to learn from them. But while we're here in this space, help us to be encouraged by you towards that goal of providing the church to be the kind of place a little bit more like the heart that Christ has. Yes, the church is a place preparing people for spiritual warfare. Yes, the church is a place preparing people, equipping them for the work of the saints, but the church is also a place where people find healing and hope and restoration. And so do that, we pray, for this workshop, for the whole conference. We thank you and pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen. So if my little thing works, David, you can nod if they can read that. But I just want to kind of begin as we think about intergenerational wholeness for Asian Americans. And we're in the wholeness in Asian American leadership development track. And so this topic that I worked out with David is about cultivating a culture of care. And I stole that line from a friend of mine, Fletcher Lang, who was one of the founding executive director for our counseling center in Boston. Culture of care is sort of what he's trying to do through the metropolitan Boston area. And I love that line. So cultivating a culture of care. So I want to begin. I don't know if it's going to work well in the physical lounge room, but for those of you online in the chat, I just invite everyone to spend just like 3-4 seconds thinking about what led you to this conference. Maybe you already did that. And again, I know there'll be more interaction in the panel, in the Q&A at the end. So you can kind of keep it focused on this. What led you to this conference on mental health, on intergenerational wholeness? What led you to this track? Or even what led you to this particular workshop? I would love to hear it and learn what's going on in people's lives. So if you're in the chat, if you could put that in the chat, that'd be great. And I don't know, David, if there's a way to have someone, come up there. Oh, okay. Oh, wow. I can see you all. I can see you in the lounge. Be scared. I can see I can't see your faces. So yeah. So I don't know, if David, if it's better for them to come up to the mic, or you can just repeat questions. But let's go ahead and put in, if there's anything in the chat, please say, I mean, what led you to this conference or this workshop or this track? It may be just one person, one or two people as we get started to prime the pump and so far. So, and thanks for keeping my chat relevant, Shiori, like a good meme. And you're probably wondering, is he one of the workshop leaders that's actually going to wait for us? And the answer might be, yeah, I'd love it if someone could be willing to do that. Anyone in the chat? Of course, I can't tell if the chat people are listening, right? So, thank you. So I guess I'll read this from Michelle. Thanks, Michelle. Attending this conference to learn more. I guess you can read it, but I'll just read it out loud so I can process it. Attending this conference to learn more about the broader conversation on Asian American Christians and mental health. I'm here at this particular workshop because I was convinced by your short soundbite on YouTube. Oh man, that's the dangerous power of social media. Thank you, Michelle. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah, I mean, that's why I think this conference is so interesting and so important. So any other thoughts? I would love it if someone from that room would just say something. I can actually hear you probably from the mic if you're sitting there. So I don't know if David, if you want to unmute, or if that's too chaotic and goes against intergenerational wholeness to have people stand and talk. Is David, everyone in Clark nod. Is David even in there anymore? Did he go out for like a little drink? Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. So yeah, any thoughts there?
I've given the altar call, Enoch. I'm waiting for the Spirit to prompt the response. Shout it out, folks. We'll pick it up on the mic and repeat it. What brings it to this particular track or workshop? You can be honest.
Oh, Sandra wrote something there. Sorry, Sandra, if we missed that. Maybe if Shiori can see that. Okay, Grace wrote something. Thank you. I'm coordinating the mental health team at my AAPI church. I want to learn best practices in supporting the pastoral staff. That's encouraging. And Sandra wrote, I lead depolarization workshops that bridges divides across the political aisles. Wow, you have quite a job. In families and intergenerationally, I'm interested in hearing your perspective on leadership as I like to get into API safe space discussions. Wow, these are, man, write those books. I look forward to reading them as you guys do that. Thanks. Wow, so thank you for everyone who's sharing. And those in person, I guess, the spirit's not moving. It's okay. So we still love you. But let me just think about what led you to this and why I feel this is so important and helpful, because the range of things is so important. Now, part of the reason why I bring this up is to sort of manage expectations. Like, even those 3 or 4 comments, they're hugely important and hugely widely different topics. And so I'm just going to share a little bit of my story in a church and give you a little bit of what I have found helpful and useful. So here we go. So in terms of this, I do want to provide a quick scriptural grounding. I hesitate to use the robust term. I'm going to provide a theology of this, but something that helps me reflect on this, a favorite verse of mine regarding this is out of Galatians 6, 1-5. I won't read it for the sake of time right now, because this isn't an expository sermon. But if you go through that, there's a couple key terms there. Paul is challenging people, to those who are spiritual, to put up with the failings and burdens of those who are weak. And he uses 2 terms there. One is load and one is burden. And as we get into this, I just want to set the stage briefly scripturally by thinking that in Galatians 6 and 5, you have this strange, almost oxymoronic thing where on the one hand, Paul says, you guys got to help each other with your burdens. And there's a sense of like, you're in it together. But then at the end in verse 5, he says, each of you is carrying your own load. And it almost seems contradictory. And I'll say it again. You need to help each other. Y'all need to help each other with your burdens, but you each need to carry your own load. And so I see that mutuality and individuality in the life of the church. I also see in that accountability, where we're holding each other accountable and we're accountable for and to each other, but we're also responsible. And the key terms there, if you want to look into it, I refer, Richard Hayes' commentary is excellent in the New Interpreter Bibles. But the key terms is burden and load. One of the popular ways to break that out without getting into the eschatological judgment there, but is that the load seems to be every individual's particular responsibilities and things they have to do. A load is something that we're all expected to carry. A burden is something that is a little bit heavier than, or more oppressive or difficult. So there's a sense in which we all work together and we're helping each other with our burdens, not just our individual loads, our burdens. And so there's that mutuality and there's that connection. And I think that's a picture of care, what it means to help each other. So if we were to kind of proceed then I just want to talk about a culture of care. And as David said, I just started a doctoral program. It's weird to be introduced as a doctoral student because it gives you total this false sense of like scholarship. But one of the things that's been drilled into me as I've begun this more formal education again, since I haven't taken formal education since the last millennia. So the idea is these definitions and precision. And I have a philosophy background, so this is not a precise definition, but just to give you an idea, culture of care is a pattern of interaction among the body of Christ with intentional growing, attention, practice, and skill. Intentional growing of attention, intentional growing of practice, and ideally intentional growing of skill to care for others as Christ cares for us. And there's a lot of scriptures, a lot of passages there, but that's what I mean by culture of care. It's not just, hey, my church does this, or hey, my leadership team does this, but actually a culture. It's not just that one person really keeps our team grounded on caring for one another. It's if you take out that key person, will that team, ministry, church, organization, business, nonprofit, will it continue? You know, it's a culture when you can't take out one or two key individuals and that cultural aspect grinds to a halt. If you can take out one or two key individuals and you cripple that dimension of that organization's life, it's not quite a culture yet. A culture is when if you try to change it, they almost have a revolt or a riot against you because it's deeply ingrained into multiple people in the practical outworking of people's lives. Okay, so that's kind of the sort of the big picture stuff. But I want to focus on Asian American. Now, a culture of care is challenging and hard. When I was considering going to seminary and pastoral ministry, a lot of people told me, hey, Enoch, you should consider getting a real job before you be a pastor. And I thought, oh, okay, let me take that to heart. Real job. Like, what do you mean? Like, a real job to know how real people are and things like that, like in the business world, the real world. Okay. My mom, for me, someone who's been a great imparter of wisdom, I said, maybe I won't go to seminary right away. She's like, why? I thought you felt called by the Lord. I said, I do, but maybe I should go to get a job or work. She's like, what do you mean? It's like, get real experience. She looks at me. What do you mean real experience? I said, oh, well, I mean, like, I guess in a typical job, you've got people like lying and backstabbing and gossiping and cheating and hurting each other and just that kind of stuff. She looks at me, not with cynicism, but with wisdom. She goes, let me tell you, you'll get all that at church. You're fine. You will see all that at church. And I don't mean to say that cynically, but that's just any human organization. Beyond that, this conference and this center and this workshop focuses on the Asian American aspect. So I know we just went from 50,000 feet down to like, 500 feet, but I want to kind of zoom in to cultures of care regarding Asian Americans. So I'm going to approach it this way. If we could think about like this, and again, if I was in the room, I'd just probably call on you or invite you to think about this, but why might Asian American heritage churches lag behind or fall or fail in cultivating a culture of care? I mean, just looking at the things in the comments, mental health team, best practices, depolarization workshops, things like that. Why might Asian American heritage churches lag in cultivating a culture of care? So, for the sake of time and interaction, because it's tricky online and in person, I just want to give you a few moments to think about this. If you're comfortable with that silence, as you think, like, or let me put it another way. Have you ever heard someone complain, man, Asian American churches or Asian American ministries or Asian American teens or Asian Americans, people, we're not the most caring people. We're not the most, caregiving types of people because, and then maybe they'll list a reason or two or three. Maybe you've heard them. Maybe you said them. I'm going to list a few and I might offend everyone here or no one. The irony is if I don't offend anyone, that means this is all wrong and Asian Americans are great at creating these things. But my guess is you might have seen or heard some of these things. So just think about this. If you were to if you would go beyond human organizations, not just why do churches in general struggle with cultivating a culture of care, or why would, but why would Asian American heritage churches lag in this? So think about that. I actually asked my wife, I asked a few other people, just see what they would say. And, it's helpful to get that pinging thing. But here's a couple. They're not the most important. And again, as we talk about this, not only is this an important topic that might have academic or practical reasons, I realize that this may be difficult because you hear a reason I'm about to say, and you lived it. It's painful and hard, or frustrating, or actually you're in it now. So I acknowledge that and just trying to be gentle as we proceed. But why might an Asian American heritage ministry or parachurch or church be seen as lagging behind in creating a culture of care? Here's some thoughts. Here are 3 common complaints I've heard over the years in my ministry, in New England and Boston, but getting to be at different places and speaking in different places around the country or the world. So here are 3 complaints. Tell me if they're Asian Americans just not as expressive. I mean, we don't show our feelings. Like I've heard literally in the same sentence, the traditional stoic Asian man. Like that's like a phrase. My father's a traditional Asian father. And I go, oh, what do you mean? He has black hair? No. He's stoic, non-expressive, that kind of thing. Okay. So, and I think I've heard that complaints. Like I wish my church or my ministries or my friends who are Christian, I wish we'd be more caring. It's just we're just not expressive. Actually, if you want to drill deeper, especially between the coasts, or if you have a more profound minority experience, I would say it's not just you're not expressive. I think minorities might actually have a certain sense of inhibition because they have to scan for danger to express certain cultural dimensions. But that's another thing. So 3 common complaints. Why aren't Asian American ministries or churches as caring? Well, maybe they're not as expressive. See if that fits. Number 2, I've heard Asian American churches are not good at caring as much as other churches because they're too concerned about saving face, about making sure everyone looks good. We won't enter that dirty zone, the messy zone, the difficulty and things like that. And I realize there are other chats going on or comments. So my screen is a little small screen, so it's challenging to say. So, Shodri or David, feel free to point me to something, verbally if you think it's really helpful, but I'm trying to look at a couple of things here. So thanks for the points, but let me finish point 2 and then let me go down to your comments just to interact with them a little bit. So, yeah, I think people say, maybe we'd be more caring if we're willing to get into the messiness, or if we're willing to be more vulnerable and talk about our difficulties and problems, if we're actually able to stop putting on a show and worried about those things. So I don't know. Again, have you heard those things? So let's see what some of the people have said here. And again, I apologize. I have to look really far down and my eye tracks way down. Caring for someone involves vulnerability and opening up to vocalize our needs. Wow. So in that statement, you got both the expression and the vulnerability, saving face. It's hard to admit the places where I'm struggling or need help. Thank you. That's something that I can definitely resonate with. And especially, so that was Michelle. Thank you, Michelle and Sandra. Especially if they're immigrants, they never got help. We will go there. They never got help. So why do you need it? Or why should you get it when they didn't? Plus, the lack of the ecosystem of AAPI nonprofit services due to the model minority myth. Definitely, Boston's Chinatown is like one of the highest per capita nonprofit social service agencies I heard someone say in the country, but the point is we have a ridiculous amount of social service agencies, but this is because Boston's Chinatown is probably one of the most politically organized and cohesive and active Asian American communities. It's got that interesting blend where it's small enough to feel the pressures of being a minority and racism and things at times where you need to organize, but it's also big enough and sophisticated enough with people going to really great schools and working there where there's actually a lot of the critical skills and personnel to kind of develop these organizations. So that's a great point. And then Vienna, I hope I'm saying it right. Generational divide and misunderstanding of a shared definition of care. Oh, that's huge. These are a lot of saying things that I'm also trying to get to, and I probably won't get to all of them, but thank you for that. I definitely can resonate with that, and I think others might as well. And if I looked at people's faces, I would imagine that I could tell you if I think they're resonating too. So let's do one more. So I got 3 complaints that I've heard, and I think a lot of them dovetail with the stuff you've got there. Here's a third one. Asian Americans are too passive. Even if we see something doing and maybe a need, we're kind of like, 5,000 years of dynastic, rice farming, which has made us meek. The nail gets pounded down, that sticks up, that kind of thing. Like, take martial arts. The squat is easy. Like it's just because, my ancestors were rice farmers, for millennia. So, I'm kind of joking, but basically there's a sense of too passive. Now, whether that's caused by inhibitions or saving face, or it's producing those sorts of things, I've heard that great complaint. Some of these complaints come from people who are more immersed in American Western culture. Often it's the younger generation in a church saying, like, this just happened in my church. Someone who married someone else in our church, so they're both wonderful believers and Christians, and one of the spouses has parents in the church on our Chinese speaking side of our ministries, and that person's parents, it is known that their marriage is having challenges. And so this young couple, this married couple, was the spouse that married into our church was sort of weeping over how come that my in-laws fellowship doesn't engage them. Like, everyone knows their marriage is struggling, but why don't they do anything? And a lot of these are frustrations and expressions and complaints, I think have come through my mind. I've definitely heard, and there's probably others. I'm not saying these are the biggest and most important, but these are 3 complaints. So if these are some of the unique things, like, because I mean, let's say in New England, Boston, or white American majority culture, probably more expressive, as a majority culture, and just boisterous and vocal, more caring about my rights than saving face, and gonna get me if I want that. Like, this is the question I often ask in my church about being passive or compliant. A lot of people there's a lot of hair salons in Chinatown, so a lot of our church members go into Chinatown and get the haircut. Can you imagine that? Okay, part of the haircut deal is they get a hair wash. You guys tracking with me? Totally not looking at you, so I can't tell if you're nodding, but they're tracking with me, and they're massaging. I've literally asked this to almost every couple that I've done weddings for in the course of premarital counseling as a way to get at how compliant they are. And I asked them this question: in Chinatown, if you're getting your hair washed, if the person washing your hair is rubbing your head so hard that it kind of is uncomfortable, do you say anything? Do you know that like 80% of people in my church would go, no, I would just sit there and I'd feel bad. I don't want to, like, and the irony is you're paying them to help you feel good and take care of your head and scalp. And actually, I'm quite certain they would want to know if they're causing you pain, but they're like, it's okay. It's just good. Those characters. So, and that's kind of funny if it's maybe like something like a hair wash. But when it's like that family's child is depressed and suicidal, that family potentially might have some domestic abuse, domestic violence issues, or that family has some serious financial concerns. Like, it's really frustrating and hard. Okay, so what I guess I want to do is we think about this. This is not about me dogging down on the Asian American sort of sense. It's to really think about, okay, how do we cultivate a culture of care? And one of the things that helps me is to recognize and admit and acknowledge that people have these complaints and these frustrations. But if we're going to move positively, here's what I would consider, just briefly. And I mean, we're probably almost done, right? Because we started at 3:30, and I'm only supposed to talk a little bit, have room for David to help us do Q&A or anything. But I would just offer 3 practices. These are things that, as I think back about my ministry, I've done. And I realized I didn't quite explain some of my background. I was going to do it later, but I think maybe it'd be helpful now. I've been a pastor at my church since 2001. Our church, pre-pandemic, had, or I should say now we have 2 campuses, one in the downtown core of Boston in Chinatown, and one in a suburb called Newton. Each campus has 3 worship services, an English service, the Cantonese service, and a Mandarin service. On the English pastoral staff, before I went on sabbatical, I'm on sabbatical because you can tell. That's why I'm speaking at 2 conferences. I'm on sabbatical. And so on the English staff alone, we probably have 6 or 7 pastoral staff on the English side. Before I went sabbatical, there were like 3 or 4 pastors working with me just on the English side, the children's ministry, youth outreach, college, young adult directors. That's kind of our schema, kind of our thing. And so my role is I get to work with and oversee the English ministries on both campuses, spanning, all the generations and interacting with all the Cantonese and Mandarin speaking side. So yes, we're trilingual. Yes, we have trilingual budget meetings. Yeah. If you thought you had it challenging. So that's kind of our context. In the course of that, as I did on my little promo video, which now I really hope does not overpromise, but is I have had the chance to counsel like families, generations. Even before that, I realized my oldest son's about to finish college, Lord willing, this May. When he and his 2 younger brothers were in the youth ministry, probably about 5-6 years ago, I realized every one of their volunteer youth counselors and actually their youth pastor, all of the people serving the youth in that Chinatown campus, I was so humbled and grateful to realize they were all my former youth and former teens. My two older sons were discipled by a guy I discipled in college. Now he's a dad of two, and he's discipled recently my second kid. And so it's just that's kind of this really sweet intergenerational blending and all these other stuff. So that's kind of my background. And so I've had the chance to do pastoral counseling, over the years on multiple languages, multiple sides. I speak English, but for the most part, I can make it with Mandarin. I can fake it with Cantonese. Okay, so these are three practices, and I call them practices because I'm not prescribing them. I don't know if they'll be helpful. You might honestly hear and go, "Oh man, that's not really applicable in my situation." But they're really mindsets. They're not tactical things to do, but they're really what I'm looking for. So three practices. So the first practice is this, and I've kind of alluded to it. It's a mind practice. I would suggest this. Look out for how Asian American Christians are actually already caring. And it's kind of a simple pedagogical thing. Like if you want to encourage someone, catch them doing something right, help them to, don't just critique the bad, but find something that's good and affirm that and try to spur that on. So look at how Asian Americans are already caring. But Enoch, you said earlier that you raised three complaints that Asian Americans aren't good, especially the overseas born. There's a perception that the immigrant culture, they're not as caring, they're more inhibited, they're not as expressive, they're passive, they don't do stuff. Actually, if I were to go another one, I said, this is my wife earlier, I said, Karen, baby, well, what would be a complaint for caring? She just said gossip. I was like, okay, I can't try to this everything, but here's a suggestion. And I want to encourage you to consider, look how Asian American Christians are already caring. So let me give you an example when it comes to caring about things. And we said that maybe we think Asians don't care or Asian American churches don't care. So here's a couple of things for what it looks like. Russell Jung, who I believe has been a friend to the center, and if I see David's thumbs up, he can do that if he's close by. But Dr. Jung, I think he's a professor in California, I think San Diego, no, San Francisco. Oh, he's gonna be so upset that I got this mixed up. Anyway, he's run a number of written helpful books for me on Asian American studies and things like that. He came and spoke at our church once, and Dr. Jung was saying, that book, that 5 love languages? I said, yeah. He's like, well, there's more than 5. And if I had to do the Asian American love language, if you don't know that book, it's basically the way you want to love people is to understand there's people receive and perceive love differently. So some people, really quickly, they like to get gifts. Some other people like quality time. Well, if I like gifts and you spend time with me, I might feel like, hey, you didn't give me anything. And so he said, there's a couple, there's one more I would add. I said, what would you add? He said, I would add food. A love language for Asian Americans is food. Grandparents across the North American continent who are from Asia, they sit down with their grandchildren. They may not even speak the same language, English in Canada or US, but they speak one thing. They basically ask, are you full yet? Do you need more? And it is not just an act of service. It is a very specific, very intimate, very like domestic sense. Like it's in your home, you're providing a meal. So I actually think food is huge. And if you don't realize that that's a love language, then you can go there like, oh, my grandma took me to eat, but I don't know, we can't communicate. In her mind, she might be, I'm doing the best thing I could do, which is give you some great food. I don't remember if Russell said this also or I said this, but I know that in my mind, as I've reflected on this, I would definitely say there's another love language. All these love languages transcend all cultures to some degree. They're present in every culture probably, but as I reflect on the immigrant experience of my family and the Asian Americans I know, I would say is a huge love language. It is called suffering. If my family members and my generations and Asians that I know in LA, where I grew up in Boston, here where I live now, suffering is a very peculiar and particular way to show you I love you. It reminds me of that old song from Fiddler on the Roof, where the one main character says to his wife, "Do you love me?" And she sings a song of like, "What? I've given birth. I feel like." She's almost never even asked a question. Like, I've done all these things. I've actually done hard things for you. And I would say to the themes of migratory loss, to the themes that you've covered, both previous podcasts with the center, if you listen to some of the great interviews David's doing, and other things like suffering is if we look at someone's willingness to suffer as a kind of love, it is a huge form of how we look at that. And I think I have to admit, in Western culture, if you're suffering, you're kind of stupid. You did something wrong. If you were smarter, you wouldn't have had to suffer. But sort of the upbringing that I've seen people grow up with in my family and others, it's like, no, actually, suffering is an opportunity. And this may sound vaguely familiar as Christians. Suffering is an opportunity to demonstrate the greatest of love. I don't know what's more Christian or Christ-like than literally suffering for the sake of love. And maybe in a elite American upper middle class, we don't want to do suffering, but it's very much a part of love. It's very much an Asian form. Persecution, suffering is very much an immigrant form. Like the whole point is suffer to get over here, to leave all the things you know so that the future generations may have a better life, even if you won't even understand the language that they're going to enjoy in that new land. So that's about like, we talked about like maybe they just, they're not as expressive, right? Or how about another one in terms of like kind of understanding this? When I was a kid and I played soccer and we'd have goals, and I remember watching other kids score goals, when you're playing as like a fourth grader, and I saw my white friends when they scored a goal, their parents would like jump and scream. And at the break, when the kid ran to the sideline, the parents would hug them and, pick them up and spin them in the air like a Disney movie or something, twirling like it. When I scored a goal, which probably never scored a goal, that might be the reason why. But if I scored a goal, I think it'd be like, good job, maybe, right? We just didn't get that. They seem to not be as expressive. But when it comes to other things, there's a lot of expression. To put a kind of a somber story, last summer, a brother in our church, I was visiting him. He's very, very, very sick. And this is a brother that I've known for the entire time I've been at the church. He's married. He's on our Cantonese side. He has now a son who's an adult son who was my former teen for youth and still a friend in our church. And I've been a small group leader to this brother. Well, I showed up at the hospital to visit him, the husband, the father. And as I walked in, the nurses whispered to me, like, he just passed. So I walked into the room. I was the first person outside of mom or wife and son to witness that. So I let them weep, and then they saw me and we embraced. And I was just going to stand there and try to be with them, stay with them if they would have that in their grief. And then two ladies from church came, professional, sharp, articulate ladies came that I've talked to many times before, but I'd never seen something. And again, this may be hard to hear. They got in there and they saw that the brother had passed away, and they went into sort of grieving Chinese mode, which I rarely see. These two articulate, amazing, intelligent people, women, started like, in Chinese, they would say, "Oh, don't go to the man. Don't go. Come back. Why are you gone? Your wife needs you." Like these things. I mean, just being there was very emotional. Just, and part of me is like, the Western part of me is like, that's pointless. Stop saying that. Like, he's gone. That's just me. But I realized this is their expression of the hurt, and this is their grief to the widow now and the son who's lost his father. And you want to see Asians express, when they express grief, they're like, I mean, it's profound. And I think it hits me more because a lot of times they don't seem to be as expressive. My point here is this: when it comes to Asian culture not being expressive, I think we might be looking at it from a particular cultural lens. And that might be limiting, and we might be shortchanging Asian culture. How about saving too much face? And I'll be this quick because I'm probably not managing my time well. The thing about saving face, especially if you're growing up in this country and you see an older generation, they just save face. They care about their image. Actually, when I study cultures that are like traditional Asian or African cultures, they wouldn't. My understanding, as a person who grew up in America, looking and trying to study other cultures, including my ancestral culture, I don't think they'd say we're about saving face. I think they would say we put the needs of our community over the needs of myself. It's not about saving face. It's about protecting the honor of my family, my village, and my country. And so that's a very different kind of care. Like, so you're saving face, so you're not showing care to one individual, but actually saving face is a form of showing care to the larger collective community. To give you an example, in New England during the initial COVID-19, the whole pandemic and stuff, like in many parts of the country, mask wearing was a source of division in the communities and even in churches. And a lot of spaces I'm like the only non-white or I'm the only Asian person, and talking about masks wearing, and can you wear a mask? Should you have to wear a mask? Should you not be forced to wear a mask? And this is what I usually tell people when I talk to my Caucasian friends, my white friends. Like if a white person in New England, this is huge broad strokes. I'm so glad this is not on the internet and going to be saved for posterity. I'm just kidding. I think I understand this will be on the internet. But like, let's say, generally speaking, when I talk to my white friends, the impression is if I don't wear a mask and you don't wear a mask and you get sick, that's on you because I didn't force you to not wear a mask. You can wear a mask. But if you don't wear a mask and you get sick, that's on you. So don't tell me that I have to wear a mask. That's sort of like what some of my Caucasian friends expressed. That was their way of thinking about it. Not all of them, obviously. And so I think when they saw like Asians in Boston wearing masks, they're like, man, they must be really scared of getting this sickness. They must be really freaked out. Now, there might have been some concern about catching COVID, because who wants to catch a disease? But actually, when I probe into people like in Chinatown, in the nonprofits and other churches and just different communities, and they're wearing a mask, if I'm close enough, I would, have the conversation. I said, are you wearing a mask? Like, why are you wearing a mask? Is there a level of fear or caution? It's like, not really. Then why do you wear a mask? Why wear a mask? Because I just don't want to get anyone sick. Because in traditional Asian culture, if you don't wear a mask and I don't wear a mask and you get sick, I feel so bad. That's on me because I didn't think of the collective group. So whereas the white American New Englander in my culture, in my community, wearing a mask is an expression of individuality and freedom. To the Asians that I spoke with, and again, these are broad strokes, I understand that, wearing a mask was about the wider collective community. So is it really that Asians don't care? Or they're caring less about individual rights and more about the collective? And as far as being passive and this is like, Asians don't. Okay, let me suggest that sometimes people are passive, but sometimes people don't self-promote. Let me say that again. Sometimes people are passive and they're not doing the thing that you want them to do. But I wonder if sometimes it's just that they're not broadcasting. They're not tweeting. They're not telling everyone. They're not posting a picture of them doing that. In Chinatown, a few years back, right before the pandemic, there was a building that went on fire. And while it stayed standing, the smoke and fire damage was so bad that they had to condemn the building. It was not inhabitable. We had actually just purchased a new building at the time, a former nursing home. And so we were renovating it. So we had this former nursing home with like 70 rooms unused in the process of renovation. And there's a displaced set of residents in Chinatown. So our senior pastor at the time, Stephen Chin, basically says, we've got this building. It was a nursing home like a few months ago. Like, why don't we get, the city to let us open it up again? Because we've kind of done some renovation work on it and offer it to the residents. So the quick version is, we were still waiting for our permit to occupy it as the church. But like overnight, the city, working with our city councilor, we got emergency permitting approval to house any residents that would come in. So then a few days later, I was at a community meeting that I'm chairing, and someone stood up in our meeting and said, hey, we got to figure out what happened to those residents. What are they going to go? What are they going to do? It's been like 3-4 days. I'm sure they're going to wear out the hospitality of their family or friends. Like, we need to help them find an intermediate place to live. And then someone literally in the room said, oh, I think the church already did that. And my friend, who's like the director of a community organizing like activist, he's like, what? The church? Like, because in a lot of, and actually those of you in the nonprofit space feel this. If I was a fundraising, like churches raise money by taking offering. Nonprofits raise money by being self-promoting things about how good work we're doing so you can give us more money for the next round of funding. I mean, that's my impression. To me, it'd be I'd feel the going against the grain. And so our church, both as Christians and maybe Asian Christians, when there's care being done, we don't post a picture about it. I mean, I would say it's kind of, we don't need to. And I would even say, I don't know, I feel like it's a biblical reference, don't practice your righteousness for the praise of others. And David has given me the 5-minute warning, I think. Is that right? 5 minutes, yes. So this is just like a sermon. 70% of the time is point one. Okay, so in terms of that, the key thing, actually on my notes, this is like more content. I should have told you that. Practices 2 and 3 will be a little shorter. And so the notion here is that I want us to take another look. As we think about Asians caring, I want us to consider this. Might we be looking at quote unquote caring from a cultural lens about those complaints? They're not expressive. They're too passive. They're concerned about saving face. Or could it be that they show care in profound ways, but maybe obvious to certain people in some cultures, but less obvious in certain cultures, that they are actually more, not that they're passive, they're very concerned about the collective. And it's not that, they're passive. They're just very low key about it. Okay. So think about that. Maybe Asian cultures show less appreciated ways. Perhaps Asian American cultures care more about the collective than the individual. And perhaps Asian American cultures are less likely to self-promote their care. Okay. So practice 1, look out for how Asian American Christians are already caring. And that's a cultural thing. Literally the other 2, there's not many slides. So we're okay on time. Practice 2, in your church organization, I would suggest be present for the moments that people reach out for care. And to me, this is a generational thing, at least in the church life. One of the biggest things that makes an Asian American couple, an immigrant couple who came over and swam across a channel to, sneak onto a boat to get over to Boston, that asks for help is not for themselves. It's for their kid. So there are really key times when they actually take that vulnerable step to ask for help. So I would suggest this: be on the lookout for and seek the Spirit's discernment in pivotal moments. In pivotal moments, there are these key times when you actually have to be there. And I would say this is tricky. Like, it doesn't happen very often. So when you have that moment, it's really, really critical. The only time I've seen proud Asian dads come to me for help is because their kid, they've lost it. They don't know what else to do. They either have to send their kid to prison or lock their kid up. They have no other way to do it. Or the only way I've seen just some proud Asian mothers is because, their parents are just so old and frail and they need help. They can't take care of them on their own and they're embarrassed. They don't feel like they're good kids. This notion here, and it's about being there at the time. In a smaller ministry or a nonprofit, and I know this doesn't work for like a nonprofit, but for me, in a church setting, it's this: your leadership and teaching sets up your counseling. In other words, if I'm teaching or I'm preaching and I say something useful, and this might be true of larger churches, then, that person says something interesting or useful, I might be inclined to want to go and approach them for counseling. Vice versa, in smaller churches, you might have visited them at a graduation ceremony. You might have gone to someone's piano recital. You might have visited the hospital, and that sets up the opportunities for counseling as well as teaching. So these pivotal moments are really key as we think about when you can do that. And I would also do this in a local church ministry. I would consider encouraging people to foster an expectation that emergency pastoral care is a legitimate and regular need. I got to be really careful here. Emergency pastoral care. You can't clarify emergency pastoral care unless you distinguish that from regular pastoral care. If you have a question and you call the pastor during dinner and the pastor says, "Oh, can I call you back after dinner?" I think it takes time, but I think people are willing to learn that. You have to be patient over time and you have to see what the culture is. But in my staff meetings, in our things, it's a thing. I'll say, "Hey, I'm happy to have this meeting, but I want you to know someone might have an emergency pastoral care counseling issue and I might need to go." And just saying that, even if I don't get the call or don't go, it makes them go, emergency pastoral care or counseling situation? I don't even know what that is. And you do that enough time. You do that to a lot of people in meetings or different things just to set, you don't do it every meeting, right? But you set it up. Then it occurs to them a couple of things like, am I having an emergency? And it goes, it creates a culture where, okay, of course, go, pastor, go. And I said this too, like, someone comes to meet with me, but they're concerned their son is sick or something. I said, maybe you should just consider going back home and helping your kid or something. So the idea that in an Asian context, actually care for things, these are legitimate needs. It goes kind of the immigrant thing to kind of suck it up and deal with it. But that's kind of the notion there here. So just again, practice. And I know Dave's there. Be present for the moment. I'm not seeing Dave right now. I'm just kidding. I'll be right. We're almost done. One more practice, David. Be present for the moments that people reach out for generationally. Quick story. As I mentioned in the promo video, some parents came to me, immigrants, very, very desperate and concerned because their kid was struggling academically. And in many cases, when the kid is struggling academically, it's the cause of Asian parents' concerns. But in my experience, when a kid is struggling academically, it's the result of mental health issues. Does that make sense? Like, not always the case, but the parents don't tend to act until, the grades are affected. But actually, the grades are a reflection of some other, in so many cases, in my experience, is depression. So we walk through that family so much, the doctor's appointments, the counseling appointments, the referrals and things like that. And the kids eventually, made it through school, they got married, different things like that. And just seeing them grow up. In the last few years, I've had these adult kids tell me, Pastor Enoch, we're really concerned about our parents and their marriage. And it's like the exact same situation, but backwards. And now I'm walking with a kid about how to deal with their aging adult parents who aren't maybe taking care of their bodies or taking care of their mental health. Their marriage is falling apart. And it's basically this, I've literally counseled kids and parents and vice versa. There are families that were the first in their friend group to have the language about special needs, the spectrum, autism, things like that. And so as we thought through those and worked through those, it was like, there was one day I was talking to some families about their special needs kids and just helping them understand the legitimate resources and effort that it's going to require to help love and take care of these kids. And we walked through them for many years. Those kids have grown up and now have kids of their own. And some of them have special needs too, or some of them are talking about that. I was sitting in a church panel watching several couples who have special needs kids talking about parenting. And as they're talking about that, it struck me, those adults who are like in their 30s, I think that adult doesn't know that I know that they have a diagnosed special need because they never told me, but their parents told me. They're on that panel because their kids have special needs and they're intervene and get an intervention early, and they're talking about that. And as I'm looking there, one of the conversations I have with about kids in their 30s and 40s now is, have you ever considered that your father or your mother has this condition or disability? Have you thought about that? We might not have caught this 20 years ago, but now today. And so I've literally seen a family, 3 generations, that have an autistic kid, very moderate at times through their family. So that's the idea of being there for the pivotal moments. David, with your permission, the last practice, it'll be quick if it's okay. Practically speaking, thank you, David. Grace at work. Thank you. Practically speaking, I'm always developing a network of counselors and therapists in my area. If I find there's a new therapist, especially Asian, I'd love to get coffee with. I'd love to treat them to actually, at this point in my ministry, my church, I can buy them lunch just to thank them for being a counselor or therapist and to get to know them. I can also ask them about the fee structures and things like that. What's the theoretical orientation? But most of that's online now, but I just really want to connect with them so that when someone's sitting in my office and has a challenging issue with marriage or family or mental health or trauma, I can literally say, I have a friend, she's a clinical psychologist, or I have a friend, he's a family therapist. Would you consider, and actually in the counseling appointment, I said, why don't you use their online intake tool? And they fill it out right in front of me. And we pray about that and we go through. So basically having those things, having that referral network is huge. And part of the reason why I helped form a counseling center is because I didn't have enough people that I felt like I could refer people to, that I trusted and that I knew and that I felt good about. So that referral network is cool. And as a pastor, one of the things I can do to help create that culture is if I connect with a therapist or a counselor and I find that I think they can be really helpful for people in our church, I will have them maybe give a talk to my pastoral team, to our staff. Because if the staff have their interest piqued, then maybe they'll learn a bit more about therapy and counseling and the resources out there and mental health issues. And then maybe when they're doing their pastoral counseling, they might actually think about that. In the last 5-6 years since we founded the counseling center, I've been so grateful that 3 or 4 of my Chinese pastoral colleagues, what's the name of that counsel? Like, they've asked me for the first time in almost 20 years, do you have a referral? Do you have the name of someone that I could refer someone to on, the Chinese side, the Mandarin side, and Cantonese side? My guess is if they've never asked me that before, they probably have never referred anyone in their ministry before. Can you imagine, to this day and age, going 15, 20 years and either not having or just never referring? And I'm not saying this in judgment, but it's like, wow, it's so limiting and there's so many good resources out there. So that's a practice too, to consider that. And that's why I suggest starting with groups or individual care, things to think about. So we can get more there, but I do want to say the main practice was develop a network and strategically provide your timely connections for your people in your church. I'll end with one story and then let David do the shepherd's crook and get me off the stage because I'm way over time. So appreciate his grace. I have gotten to the point now in a sermon where if it touches on counseling, I will say this publicly. If you come to my office for pastoral counseling about a wisdom decision or about a grief issue or about a practical concern, I will almost certainly, before you leave our office and end our pastoral counseling session, I will almost certainly, among many suggestions, encourage you to consider going to see a counselor. I couldn't say that probably when I got to my church without raising all sorts of questions about theology or the efficacy of counseling. It took it took 20 years, literally. So now if I go, I can say, we're talking about depression. I just got to say, if you come to me sharing about depression, I will encourage you. I will walk with you. I'll help you find someone that you can talk to more. And our social responsibility committee has some resources and money that can help you get scholarship. We are a church that sees this as one of the great tools and resources out there to help people become whole and across the generations. So that's kind of how we do it as a church, a little bit of that. Thank you for your attention.